Welcome to the Longmont Observer's interview with City Folk. Today we've got Mike Butler, who is the Chief of Public Safety, and we will be talking about how the operation works, the people that are in it, the kinds of things they're doing and some of the programs they're working on, as well as how it fits into the city and how the city overall uses the services that are available from public service. So Mike Butler, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to Longmont and how you got here.
Okay, well, thanks for this opportunity. I'm Mike Butler. I'm the Public Safety Chief. I'm a long-time Longmont resident. I've been here for 40 years, and I've raised 5 daughters in this community. They all graduated from Longmont High School. I've been the Public Safety Chief for the last 9 years, and prior to that, I was Longmont's Police Chief for approximately 15 years. And prior to that, I worked for the City of Boulder Police Department. So I love this community. I feel really good about the work we're doing here. I feel honored and privileged to be able to do the work that I am doing. And so, good to be here.
All right, fantastic. So, I've got a bunch of questions for you here, so I'm just going to run through if that's all right with you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, let's talk a little bit about the public safety organization in general. So, as we know, public safety isn't just about the police. It often includes fire services, rescue services, hazmat services, ambulances, EMS, police, security guard, licensing. There's all kinds of different sort of things that are around that. Tell me a little bit about what are the public services that public safety's got.
Well, Scott, you hit on several of them. First of all, we do have police services, and we have a full-service police service department. We work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We have our patrol services, our detectives, our gang crime suppression unit, our school resource officers, our traffic unit, and we have a bunch of other specialty services that we provide that this community is asked for, and so that's police services. With fire services, we do have a suppression operations division. They respond out of 6 fire stations that are located strategically from throughout the community. We have 7 engine companies that work out of those 6 fire stations. We also have a hazardous material team, and we have a technical rescue team, and we have a wildland fire team. And so the ambulance service is a service that is a private service that we contract with. It's AMR services. We have a unique model and format with the ambulance service. They work out of our stations as well. So they're located in the central quarter of Longmont. We have Station 4 on the north end. We have Station 1 in the middle. We have Station 6 more on the south end, and that's where our ambulances operate out of. And so we also have the Office of Emergency Management, and that is a service that provides preparation and response to any major either natural or man-made emergency that might occur in our community, like the flood we had in 2013, or potentially a major weather event like a tornado, or perhaps a hazardous material spill. We have people in emergency management that know how to respond. That we work a lot on preparation and resiliency of our community. We work a lot on response, and we work a lot on recovery. And we have a communications center that operates out of our building, out of public safety. It's normally seen as a dispatch, referred to as a dispatch center. It's the 911 call center. They operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and answer all the 911 calls and the non-emergency calls for service. We have about 90,000 calls a year for police and about 10 to 12,000 calls a year for fire. And we have another probably 50,000 calls that don't go to police or fire that are handled right out of dispatch. So they're a very, very busy unit within public safety.
All right. Wow. So let's talk a little bit about police reform and community policing. So often, the most challenged communities really present some of the most urgent demands for public safety. Yet they tend to be the ones that most strongly resent the methods that police employ to provide public safety. So, do you believe in community-oriented policing? And what are some of the stories that, assuming that that's a yes, which I believe it is, tell us some stories about how that works in Longmont.
Well, Yeah, we operate with a philosophy of community-oriented policing, and I will explain that. Something that we all believe in terms of how we ought to operate. It's the belief that this community is as responsible as we are in terms of ensuring that we're safe and that the public is safe in this community. And it's it can present itself in many different ways. Now, we do have reactive patrol services that answer calls for service. We have reactive fire services that answer medical calls and calls for service for fires. So we do have that reactive aspect to our public safety. Community policing takes on the concept and notion that we are working in partnership with our community, and it's a philosophy of working in partnership with the people. Our motto is actually working in partnership with the people, and we work very closely in terms of developing relationships and connections with the people of our community. We work to try to strengthen neighborhoods. We do a lot of work with our business community, our faith community, and people of color community, and so we work very closely. Community policing is actually based on relationships and connections, and we don't want to be a kind of a faceless entity within our community. We don't want to hide behind our fortress. We really want to be able to personalize who we are and doing what we're doing. And we believe we can leverage a lot of the social capital that's in our community by doing that and bringing the gifts, the talents, the skills, the resources, the expertise that our community has to the surface, and to really activate that in a way that they can be present and can be part of the solution as well. Police services, fire services can only do so much in a community. In fact, I often say we're only as good as the community we serve. And so that's how we see community policing, and it comes in a lot of different forms and a lot of different ways through Longmont Public Safety.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about something that some of our readers have asked us about, the militarization of the police forces that we're seeing happen in America now, and to some degree, I don't think it really can be avoided in any city. I don't know where we're at with that, but it really isn't just about the police here. It often includes this same thing happening to fire services and rescue services. So what I'd really like to know is to kind of get an idea of where you stand on that. We see police out there in body armor. We see them driving what effectively are tanks, and a lot of people, that's intimidating. It doesn't really fit in with the community service so much. So, and I don't see it too much here, but
Well, let me just say that police departments have to be a lot more versatile, I would say, in terms of providing police services. We do have services here that operate from a special weapons and tactical perspective, and we have services here that operate in terms of working with kids, working as school resource officers, and working closely with our community. And so when we hire people, we have to hire people who can be quite versatile in the work that they're doing, because in 1 minute they might be working with kids and might be working with a neighborhood, and in another set of circumstances they might have to respond in which they need special weapons and tactics in order to be able to do that. Now I want to explain, some people wonder about our SWAT team, and I've had questions about that over the years. We do not use SWAT as an aggressive police tactic. We use it to keep everybody in the set of circumstances we're responding to safely. And over the years, our SWAT team has never had to fire a weapon. And a lot of that is because we do a lot of preventative work with our special weapons and tactical team, and we are very, very safe. We keep if there's victims or hostages, we keep them safe. We want to keep our officers safe. And if there is a suspect or perpetrator, we want to keep them safe as well. So over the years, the many years that we've had a SWAT team, we've never had a shooting out of the SWAT team. And that's because of how we use our SWAT team. It's designed to keep everybody safe. A lot of people see it as an aggressive police tactic. It's not here in Longmont. It's designed so that when we go to these set of circumstances, and almost on every single operation where we use special weapons and tactics, there is a suspect or perpetrator that is armed with a firearm or more than one firearm, has threatened to kill either us, somebody that they're holding hostage, or somebody else. And so we go into these circumstances, and our way of gauging and measuring effectiveness is when we come out of those circumstances and everybody is safe. And so that's our use of SWAT. Now sometimes when we go on these calls, we have large vehicles. We have a mobile command center. We have other vehicles. We have a bomb unit. Sometimes we encounter suspicious packages. And so those look like militarized like vehicles and equipment, but they're really not. They're community vehicles, frankly, that the community has paid for. And they serve us as tools so that we can do those kinds of operations safely. And so even though they might look big, we don't have tanks, by the way, and so we also regionalize our SWAT. We work with Frederick, we work with Boulder County, and so we've done a lot of work in terms of training and operating with those communities as well.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about bias. So researchers in social neuroscience have shown that some bias really is hardwired into every human being and every human brain. And being in a policeman, that obviously has that can have more of a serious consequence. So how do you make sure that you and your police force have got a solid awareness of your own biases and your abilities to work around them?
I'm going to take a different approach in answering this question, Scott. Yeah, we all come with deficiencies. We all come with weaknesses. And we have worked with trainers who have come in to our public safety department and basically have indicated to us that we do have those weaknesses and those deficiencies. And what I have found when that happens is that people tend to kind of shut down when they're told that they have these deficiencies and weaknesses. And there was a speaker, and I'm going to name who he is. His name is Dan Benavides, who I listened to once give a presentation on diversity. And what he did was he spoke to the room in terms of the gifts they had to offer. He looked at them through the lens of gifts and said, here's what you have to offer. Here's what you can offer our Latino and Hispanic community. And so he took a different tact to it. And so I asked him to come in and do some training with Longmont Public Safety, Police and Fire. And basically he came in and he basically more or less said, I want to operate from a perspective that you have lots of gifts, you have lots of talents, you have lots of resources that you can offer our community. And our staff was quite receptive to him because he came at it from another angle. Didn't mean that they still didn't have some biases. It didn't mean that they don't have backgrounds and maybe a little bit of baggage from where they come from. But what they began to see and realize is that they had a lot to offer. And so they came at and we started working with our Latino Hispanic community. And by the way, there's other marginalized community people within our community as well. There's folks who struggle with addiction. There's folks who struggle with their mental health. There's folks who are struggling with poverty. There's a lot of folks who are potentially either self-marginalized or marginalized by our community or our society. And I would rather have our staff working with those folks from a perspective of seeing them as having gifts and not necessarily seeing them as a problem to be solved. A lot of the implicit bias training comes across as a model as there are people in the room are a problem to be solved. And they look at them through the lens of there's something going on inside of you that you have to fix. Well, Dan came in it from a perspective of you have all of these great talents, these gifts, and so what that helped us do is model that. And as we worked with the Latino community and other people who are marginalized in our community, we began to look at people differently. And so it was a modeling that I think has played out well. And so it's a different take on how we're doing business, but I believe, and that's how we're doing business here, is that we're not coming at this and looking at people as if they are a problem to be solved or through the lens of their deficiencies. We're looking at folks as someone, as people who have gifts to offer, the rest of us. And our goal in public safety is to try to figure out how to get them on that path so that they can offer those gifts to the rest of us. I know that doesn't seem like a traditional public safety role, but we've been coming at this from the criminal justice criminalizing perspective for way too many years. The war on drugs, the war on a lot of social issues, the criminalization of homelessness, of addiction, of mental health. You ask any sheriff in this state or in this country, and they will tell you that they are the biggest mental health ward in their county. And about 80% of the folks that they have housed in their prisons and their jails struggle with either addiction and or mental health. Well, we're coming at it from an entirely different perspective. And so rather than arresting people all the time because they're possessing an illegal drug, we're actually doing our best to refer those folks either to our Angel Initiative, which I can explain.
Yeah, talk about that some.
Well, the Angel Initiative is a program that started in January of 2017. Basically, we opened our doors to anybody who is struggling with an addiction. And if you come into the Longmont Public Safety Department and say, I'm struggling with an addiction and I want service, we will find you. We will find you addiction treatment. So far, over 80 people have come in to our Public Safety Department and basically waved their flag, white flag, and said, I'm struggling with an addiction and I'd like addiction treatment service. And we have found each and every one of them addiction treatment. And on top of that, we have people in the community who support these folks that we've recruited. We call them angels, who support these folks emotionally and actually serve as a taxi service so people can get back and forth to treatment. We've recruited employers in our community who will employ people who are in recovery. And then we have a group of people within a group of citizens who are really trying to galvanize and rally the rest of the community to get to embrace addiction differently, because a lot of people see addiction as kind of as a weakness, and maybe sometimes they believe it's a criminal justice system issue. We're trying to get people to see that it's a disease and that it's something that people really don't have a lot of choice about, and we're trying to get our community to kind of embrace that aspect, that kind of dimension of addiction. And so the Angel Initiative has been a very powerful component of how we're doing business.
All right. So talk to me a little bit about procedural justice. Interesting term, sounds technical. It's been shown that people are much more likely to obey the law when they believe that those who are enforcing it also have a legitimate authority to tell them what to do. What justice, that justice is really being applied in a fair and transparent manner. How does our police force apply that type of approach?
I'm going to probably use another phrase too. We call it restorative justice.
Right.
And
there's a whole program around that area.
Yes, there is. We started, there was a person named Beverly Title and myself and somebody else named Lionel Leonard who started the restorative justice process services in this community over 20 years ago. And now the services are being provided by the Longmont Community Justice Partnership. And restorative justice is it's a process that incorporates several principles like relationship, principles like responsibility, respect, reintegration. And so when we respond to a crime, whether it's a child under the age of 18 or an adult, we weigh the possibility of utilizing restorative justice. Our officers do that. But over the years, we've referred close to 6,000 people that we could have arrested or summoned into the restorative justice process. And just so that people know that are watching this, our criminal justice system, the recidivism rate is around 60 to 65%. What that means is that when someone is arrested or summoned and goes through the system, that their likelihood of committing another crime is around 60 to 65%. I'll explain restorative justice here in a minute, but within the restorative justice process, over the number of 6,000 people, the recidivism rate has been less than 10%. And so we use those principles of reintegration, responsibility, relationship, respect, in a way that helps people who have committed a crime to choose accountability. And we've helped victims who are victims of crime have a say in terms of what's happening. And so let's say we respond to a crime and we refer that case to restorative justice. First of all, it's voluntary. The offender has to agree to do it and the victim has to agree to do it. Once they agree to do it, the Longmont Community Justice Partnership kind of steps in and they coordinate a conference between the offender and the victim and their support groups and other people from within the community. And they have a conversation in which the victim's voice becomes the centerpiece. They get to say, here's how I was harmed. And then the offender has an opportunity to talk about what it was like for them. And so there's a conversation that goes on. There's a mediated, facilitated conversation that goes on between the offender and the victim. And there's oftentimes a lot of repair that's done right there in that meeting. There's a lot of apology and there's a lot of forgiveness going on within that meeting itself. There's also a contract that the offender has to agree to in terms of how they're going to repair the harm for the victim. And so like I said, the recidivism rate is less than 10%. And then there's people in the community, Scott, that are in those meetings as well, and they let the offender know, here's how your actions impacted us, a community member. So the offender is not only accountable to the victim, they're accountable to something bigger than that too. They're accountable to the community as well. And so we give them that opportunity to choose accountability. In the criminal justice system, we have a sacred right of the right to remain silent, but oftentimes there's no accountability taken by somebody who has been arrested or summoned, and I think that lends itself to a high recidivism rate. And so when people do choose accountability, I think they are making a choice to sustain what they're saying they're going to be accountable to in the long run, and so the recidivism rate isn't as big. So it's a process that we've used for over 20 years. Like I said, we've referred over 6,000 people. There's literally tens of thousands of people in this community that have been exposed to restorative justice, either as an offender, as a victim, or as a community member. And it's something that we believe has lent itself over the years to why Longmont really is such a safe community in the state of Colorado in the United States.
Fantastic. So let's talk a little bit about accountability on the other side as well then. So everyone in a police department needs to be accountable, as you know. And to be accountable really for understanding the law itself and acting in accordance with it. Chiefs, however, are also accountable for fostering a professional culture in which law and policy are executed faithfully and without exception. What are the ways that you foster accountability here in the Longmont Police Department?
Well, let me just talk a little bit about a police officer's job for the most part. And firefighters are a little bit different, but they kind of fall in the same realm. Much of what a police officer does is on their own. They're out there by themselves. They make decisions by themselves. They interact with the community, whether they're offenders or suspects or witnesses or other people, by themselves. And so I'd say about 90% of the time, a police officer is operating on their own. And so a lot of what goes into that kind of accountability, there's various things that have to occur. First of all, we put a tremendous emphasis on the people we hire and ensuring that they can choose accountability. We want to hire people who have their life experienced. They're no longer the center of their own universe, so to speak. They perhaps have experienced some rejection, some disappointment, failure in their life. They're willing to work as a team, and they come in with this spirit of service versus the spirit of adventure. We know that there's a lot of adventure in this job. Sometimes lights and sirens, sometimes arresting the bad guy. But we want our police officers operating out of that kind of realm of spirit of service. And so those are the kinds of folks we hire. The average age of the person we hired for a police officer is hovering around 30 years of age. They've already had jobs, they're college educated, married with children, and so they've experienced some things in their life, great interpersonal communication skills, can work with lots of groups, and and a diverse population. And so that's very important. The hiring process is very important, not only as it plays out in accountability, but also how it plays out in the kind of force and the level of force we use. If we find that someone has tried to solve problems in their life by using violence, we do not hire those folks. In fact, if you have an ounce of that within your background, we don't hire those folks. We want to hire people who want to verbally or through some level of collaboration or cooperation work through the issues that they're confronting at that point. So, but in terms of accountability, the other piece that comes into this is we've developed what we think is a culture of accountability here. And what I've said to people over time, and I don't know how this is going to sound to the public. I don't know if I've ever said this to the public, to be honest with you. But I don't sit here and try to demand accountability. I'm not going to say I'm going to hold you accountable. I don't try to legislate accountability. I don't try to pass a lot of policies or procedures thinking that we're going to legislate accountability into the people that are working here. Nor do I try to purchase accountability and holding up a carrot in front of somebody and saying, I'll give you this carrot if you're accountable. We expect our people to choose accountability. And that comes through the hiring process. We think the major force for accountability comes from the person. The second most powerful force for accountability comes from their peers. The third most powerful force comes from their supervisors. And then the fourth is what comes out of what people think is the internal affairs process or the chief's office in terms of holding people accountable. Now, we utilize all of those, but we expect our people to choose accountability. We hire the right people, and then we create an environment here in which people truly do want to choose accountability. And so, like I said, 90% of the work police officers do especially are on their own. And so if they're not choosing accountability when they're on their own, we're all in trouble. And so we go through an extensive hiring process. We go through extensive amounts of training. We have developed a culture here in which if people aren't choosing accountability, it's more likely that their peers are going to call them on that. And so that to me is a stronger force for accountability than trying to legislate it, trying to demand it, or trying to purchase it. And what's interesting is that plays out when police officers work with people in the community too, because they're modeling that sense of, I'm being treated like an adult, I want to choose accountability. And so when they're working with people in the community, that's how they come across. They don't come across as if they're the enforcer, they're the tough guy with the badge, and they're the man, so to speak. They come across as people who want to work in partnership with the people and who want others to choose accountability as well. So it's a different way of describing how we bring about accountability, but I'm absolutely convinced it's a much more powerful, sustaining way of getting people within an organization to actually choose accountability and to have that culture of accountability.
So most modern police forces seem to be big on technology now, and data also to measure the results of policies and procedures. So objective metrics have really been shown to go a long way towards reinforcing accountability. So how does our police department use metrics to measure results?
In a lot of different ways. We look at the productivity of every single person who's here, and we keep track of that productivity. We look at use of force on the part of police officers. Are there patterns of use of force on the part of any one police officer? We look at complaints from the community. Are there complaints that are coming in directed towards any one police officer or firefighter, more so if there's a pattern or theme? And so we look at those things quite regularly and to make sure that our officers are being productive, that they are utilizing force to the level that they need to use force, and that they're working with the community in the way that we expect them to. So those are three pretty powerful ways that we use metrics to look at every single police officer and at some level every single firefighter within public safety.
How does the police force use technology like body cameras to protect both the police and the public?
You know, we're in the process of implementing a body camera program. We haven't done it yet. but we're still in the process of researching. Now, I know body cameras has become a popular maybe panacea, if you will, for people within a community, whether they're elected officials, whether they're community members or police departments. And I know a lot of this kind of was spawned out of the issues over the last 3 years that we've seen in policing with incidents in Ferguson, Baltimore, Cleveland, New York, and other communities. And so, rightfully so, there was a major spotlight put on our policing profession over the last few years, and I think that was actually a good thing to happen. But I think what's going on here is that people diverted, or I think they jumped pretty quickly in thinking body cameras would increase trust, would increase transparency, would increase better relationships between the police and the community. What we've seen, though, is that we've actually seen some interesting kind of outcomes so far amongst police departments that are utilizing body cameras. There's a lot of policy issues. There's a lot of policy confusion about how to use body cameras. There's a lot of technology issues that are happening. We're going to go to body cameras, but I've been pushing back a little bit to ensure that a lot of the things that need to be worked out around policy, on the use of body cameras, and on the technology have more or less been resolved, and it's still not resolved. In fact, there are departments that went to body cameras that have backed out of the body camera business, and so we want to make sure that what we step into, because it's an expensive $350,000 to $400,000 a year expenditure for this community to have our officers have body cameras. So, and we just hadn't had the issues here in Longmont to suggest that there's trust issues, that there's confidence issues, that there's not skill issues or competence issues. But we also know that body cameras are a technology that a lot of police departments, especially in Boulder County, are converting to, and so we will do that eventually. We have the resources now to do that, but we're still working on the policy and technology issues to make sure that when we do that, when we flip that switch, that we're not going to have to make a lot of changes after that switch is flipped.
Is there a timeline on that, or is it?
No, there isn't, but I would say in the next 6 to 12 months, you're probably going to see something with body cameras in Longmont.
Okay. So, police unions, let's talk a little bit about that. Unions provide really an important representation and professional protection for police officers. Unfortunately, a union's defense of officer members sometimes conflicts with police community relationships. How do we enlist unions as partners here, and how do you work with them to make sure that works?
Well, first of all, in public safety, we have two unions. We have a union that represents fire, and a union that represents police. Those came into existence around 12 years ago, and so at this point, we have a great partnership with our unions. They're invited to every single meeting. We want them to be represented in all of our staff discussions, all of our policy discussions, all of our procedure discussions, the important meetings where we're trying to basically create our own future here. We want their voice heard. It's not just the unions, though, that we want heard. We want all of our staff. That's been a way of doing business since I've been here, is that every single meeting we have is open. And anybody can put anything on the agenda that they want. But what I tell people, your voice counts, your thoughts matter, your humanness is valued, but the price for your voice is that you have to have an agenda that's bigger than your self-interest. And the same with the union. And so when we come to the table and we decide what policies or procedures we're going to have, we want everybody to come at it from a perspective that this is for the good of the whole. This is for the good of serving our community. And so that's the culture we have here in these meetings. If you come into a meeting and you're coming at it from the perspective of, well, it's not working for me, or I'm a victim, or your own sense of self-interest, you get little to no airtime. And the union operates that way. We have a union executive board in both fire and police that operate very professionally. understand that the good of the whole and the service we provide our community is what makes us all strong, including the unions. We work very closely with them, not only on policy and procedural issues, but on personnel issues as well. And so they've been a great partner. We've had very, very, very few, maybe 1 or 2 grievances in the 12 years that the unions have been in place because of the open communication. And I want to give the unions credit in terms of ensuring that they didn't come across as with axes to grind. They came across as saying, here's what we think is best for our community, here's what we think is best for our department. And so our unions have been operating that way since the beginning, and it's been a great relationship.
All right. So our editor-in-chief, Sergio Angelis, had asked you in an email recently about the homeless issues in Longmont and what we're doing from a police perspective and a public safety perspective dealing with the homeless issues that, as you know, over the last few years have gotten substantially worse than they were. Where are we at with that?
Well, he's right in terms of the substantially worse part. There was a time 10 years ago, 12, 13 years ago, where we could count the number of people struggling with homelessness on one hand, frankly. And we knew their names, we knew where they hung out. And over the last 10, 12 years or so, that number has grown considerably. And our officers, the officers who keep track of folks struggling with homelessness, and what I'm talking about are the chronically homeless people. There's various kinds of levels of folks struggling with homelessness, but I'm talking about folks who live under bridges, live by the river, and are chronically homeless on our streets. That number has burgeoned up to about 350. And that's a summertime number. It's a little bit seasonal. We still have a number of folks who stay in Longmont during the winter, but we also have folks who are struggling with homelessness who leave for warmer climates, if you will. But in the summertime, we end up with a fairly large number. And so police and fire 24/7, that has sapped a lot of our resources. I will talk about the patrol division. And I would say in the summertime, about 50% of our resources within a patrol division are used in dealing with folks struggling with homelessness. And that's the reactive. Someone's calling in on a welfare check. Someone's calling in and saying someone's in my property. Someone's sleeping in the doorway. Someone's intoxicated. Someone's afraid. And so we get a lot. Those are the nature of the kinds of calls that we get from folks in our community when they have as dealing with folks struggling with homelessness. And so this is not an easy issue, and Longmont is not unique in the people struggling with homelessness. In fact, this is a societal issue in our country, and we're a community of about 100,000. And what's interesting is that the larger your community get, the more likely it is to take on the attributes and characteristics of a larger community. And communities our size or larger all have similar issues, social and health issues, and the homelessness is one of those. And so what's also going on with folks struggling with homelessness is addiction and folks struggling with their mental health. And so
it takes us back to the Angel Initiative.
It gets back us not only to the Angel Initiative, but recently Longmont Public Safety received 2 fairly large grants to deal with folks struggling with addiction beyond the Angel Initiative, with addiction and their mental health. We're going to be able to hire a number of people who are going to proactively work with people who are struggling with their mental health and struggling with addiction. We're not just going to react as we've done in the past in terms of calls for service. We're going to continue to do that when we need to. But now we have a real proactive, coactive way of responding to people, and we can find them services. We can divert them out of the criminal justice system, either into the mental health service system or into the addiction treatment service. And so we're working with people very closely now in terms of working that way. Out of those 80 people that I mentioned so far, half of those folks that walked through our doors wanting addiction treatment service, half of those folks were struggling with homelessness. And by the way, I just want to make it clear, and for whatever it's worth, I think it's important the rhetoric we use and around folks. We're trying to get out of the business of labeling. You can call someone addicted, you can call someone mentally ill, you can call someone homeless. And as I talked about before in terms of how we are with people and how we treat people, when you do that, you really are defining them as a person with a problem to be solved. They're saying to themselves they're addicted, they're homeless, they're mentally ill because there's someone, a service provider or someone from public safety has said that about them. And so we don't look at folks that way. And we don't look at them necessarily through the lens of the deficiency. That's why we have the Angel Initiative. That's why we applied for. We're one of 2 departments in the state of Colorado, 2 cities, that applied for and got both of these grants. And by the way, these could be long, ongoing grants. Ironically, maybe, but the money that that supplies these grants come from the state tax on marijuana, on the taxes on marijuana. So that pot money is coming back into our communities where we can actually go out and help folks struggling with addiction and mental health. And so we're taking on that way of doing business in public safety. And people will say, well, why is public safety doing that in terms of being so proactive and preventative? Well, it's because for years we dealt with it just from a reactive perspective. So public safety is more than just about any other department or any other entity within a community deals more with folks struggling with mental health and addiction than anybody else because we're out there 24/7 on the street. Those are the kind of calls we're getting. And as I said, with folks struggling with homelessness in the past, 50% of our patrol services resources were being used just to work with people struggling with homelessness. And so it's something that we've been in the business, trying to be in the business here in Longmont of trying to solve problems. And one of the metrics that we use is when we have a problem place, whether it's a business, a house, or a neighborhood, is our effectiveness is gauged by the lack of need for us. And so when we go into a location, our goal is to ensure that we are not as needed in the future. And so we can look at the calls for service and say, hey, we've been to this location 50 times. Well, our effectiveness is gauged and measured by the fact that now we don't have to go there at all. And so when we work with folks struggling with homelessness or addiction or mental health, we want to be able to provide a service where they don't have to constantly come in contact with police. We have people in this community that have had 400, 500 contacts with police and fire, hundreds of hospital visits, and that consumes a lot of resources. And so we can continue to do business that way and use those resources that way, or we can move upstream and figure out how to prevent and be more proactive so that person can find a way of living their lives with treatment and support in the community where we don't have to be in contact with them. And so that's how we measure part of our effectiveness.
So let's talk a little bit about budgets. So the residents of the city of Longmont recently voted in a new tax that provides literally millions of dollars of additional money for public safety. Tell us a little bit about that tax, how it works, how do you plan on using those additional funds?
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you to the community. We think it was a vote of confidence and a vote of trust. 62% of the people voted for that. We're convinced that if our public safety was not well thought of, was not trusted, and people didn't have confidence, that vote wouldn't have come out that way. And so, yes, I can't recall exactly how much on a penny. I think it's like 1 penny for every $25 that people spend is a new tax for them, I believe. And so, but it raises about $6 million more a year for public safety. And those dollars will be used to hire police officers. They'll be used to hire people who can work more with animal control, work more with traffic. They'll be hiring a couple of firefighters. One of the things I want people to know is that sometimes in a Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 job, you can fill a vacancy with one person. But when you're working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, it takes 5.1 people to provide around-the-clock service for one position. And so when you look at 168 hours in a week and how much resources it takes 5.1 police officers to put one more police officer on the street around the clock. And so we're hiring 5 police officers this year, which frankly only put 1 police officer around the clock more, and then 5 more next year. And so while that may, when you say hire 5 police officers, that seems like a lot in this community, the net result is only 1 more on the street on any given hour of the day. So we're also hiring what we call a police armorer. We have a lot of weaponry in this department that has to be taken care of, has to be maintained, has to be fixed. And right now, police officers do that. We send them to training, and they know how to fix and maintain other police officers' sidearms and rifles, but that takes them off the street. And so hiring an armorer at a much cheaper rate is going to be able to put more officers on the street and let that person, that specialty, kind of take over. The other position that we're hiring this year is a legal advisor, a public safety legal advisor. Case law changes constantly. Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment, use of force, case law is in a constant state of flux. And the application of new case law becomes critical. And so we're going to be able to hire a legal advisor who can constantly let police officers know what the new case law is and and how to apply that case law. And in fire services, we'll have a public safety legal advisor that can help people through confidential HIPAA issues and how to work more with folks in the medical world as well. And so it's a position that we've been asking for a number of years, and we're going to be able to get that out of the public safety tax. More resources are also going to go to traffic enforcement as well. When we do our citizen surveys, people are more concerned about traffic as a public safety issue than any other issue that exists within the community. And we all know what's happening with traffic in our community. The volume has increased dramatically. I'd say the accident rate, interestingly enough, has remained about the same. It's going up a couple of percent, down a couple of percent. It's maintained itself. And that has a lot to do with I think the work that our current traffic unit is doing in terms of being preventative and looking at the high accident intersections in our community and doing a lot of preventative and enforcement work at those intersections. And so accident or traffic enforcement is going to be big out of that public safety tax as well.
So talk just a little bit about what does the force in Longmont look like? How many police do we have at any given moment on the streets?
Well, that's interesting. When I ask people, how many police officers do you think we have on the street right now in the city of Longmont? We have 300 plus miles of roads. We have 100,000 people. And so with that, we have 36,000 households. How many police officers do you think we have? Most people on the street right now, most people think 20, 25 police officers. And that sounds about right for that kind of area of 20, 25 square miles, 300 miles of roads, 100,000 people. But right now, we probably have 9 or 10 police officers on the street. There are certain days, hours and days out of the week where we do have more. We're able to calibrate where higher calls for service hours and days are, and we staff for those. But on average, we have 8 to 10, 11 police officers on the street at any one given time. And I also want to talk about public safety also has fire in it as well. We have 6 fire stations. We have 7 engine companies. We have what we call a ladder truck and a regular engine that operate out of the central station. And we have a minimum staffing in our fire services for 23 firefighters on duty 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so I just want to talk about that as well. The vast majority of calls they go on are emergency medical calls. They are highly skilled in the area of suppressing fires. What the community doesn't hear about is how many dollars we save businesses by being able to get there as fast as we can and suppressing the fire as fast as we can. We don't have a lot of fires in this community, thankfully, and that's a trend throughout the country. There's fewer fires than there used to be. But boy, when there is a fire, it's good to have a competent and skilled fire service. They're also very skilled in the arena of hazardous materials, of technical rescue, and also with emergency medical services. Every one of our firefighters is an EMT.
So they're cross-trained.
We're cross-trained with that, and so we have approximately 25 paramedics who have a higher level of being able to provide medicine and medical services. And so on any given hour of the day, we have at least 5 or 6 paramedics operating in the community. And one of the things that we're pretty proud of, there's 2 things we're pretty proud of as it comes to the fire service, is number one, our ISO, our Insurance Service Office rating, went from 4 to 2. That's a rating scale of 1 to 10. And we recently had an assessment a year or so ago of how well this fire department and how well what our capacity is to be able to provide fire services in the community.
And smaller is better. Right?
Smaller is better. One's the highest, and there's maybe 90-some fire departments in the country that have a ranking of 1, and we're very close to that right now. And so the other thing we're really proud of in terms of a service,
before you go, that affects our
insurance rates.
Everybody's insurance rates.
It does, and I will tell you, if you don't know about this right now, we've had a number of people call us and say our insurance rate went down because the ISO rating from fire service went from a 4 to a 2.
Yeah.
Check with your insurance company and see if they operate off that ISO standard, and if they do, there's a good opportunity, there's a chance that your insurance rates can go down as well. And we've had a number of people call us and say, thank you, our insurance rates went down. And so at some level, we've kind of given back to the community that way as well.
Great.
So the other thing in terms of a service is that our capacity to revive people who have had heart attacks is very high. The national rate is like 9 or 10 or 11%. Ours is 48%. And so I'm not saying go out and have a heart attack, but if you're going to have a heart attack, better have it here in Longmont, because your chances of surviving are a lot greater here. And it has a lot to do with the skills of our paramedics and our EMTs. It has a lot to do with our response models, and so we take that seriously.
So we had an experience at the Longmont Observer with you recently where we asked for information on misconduct in the police department. Right. And the response we got was what we kind of expected, which was initially a no. And then my understanding is you stepped in and said, no, we need to be transparent. Talk about your beliefs on transparency.
The person who said no is somebody that knows what she's doing in terms of records release, and technically
it was
we
a no.
We could say no,
Yeah.
and so that was her role. But we do operate from a transparent perspective, and when I did find out about it, I said, sure, we'll give them all the information. You asked for 2 years worth of 2016 and 2017. We gave you all the information. We gave you the allegation of misconduct, whether it was sustained, not sustained. We gave you the discipline that was imposed. A few people were terminated. A few people received suspension. I want to say most of those were preventable car accidents, or about half of those were preventable car accidents. By the way, in terms of numbers, I think in 2016 we had 6 allegations of misconduct where we actually filed a formal investigation, and in 2017 we had 9. Part of the transparency also goes into who we invite in and who gets to be part of how we do business. Now, people might think of police departments as being these fortresses, these impenetrable entities that only the people within the police department know about, and there's all these secrets and there's all these mysteries. Well, for many years we've invited our community into our organization. They sit at staff meetings, they come up with ideas about how we can operate differently. They help us hire police officers, they help us promote, they help us appoint people, They help us with strategic planning. They help us with our business models. We invite high-tech people into here to help us with that. And so we have brought in a lot of expertise from the community and a lot of people into the community, into our midst. And so if anybody wants to come in and find out what we're doing or what we're about, if you want to come in and volunteer, or if you want a copy of policies or procedures, or if you want to, we have a Citizens Academy once a year that you can attend. We were very open about that. The last thing I want to talk about with that transparency piece is that we actually, in those investigations I mentioned, Scott, the 6 and 16 and the 9 and 17, we have a citizens review panel. And there's 5 citizens in this community selected by the city manager who sits on this panel and reviews every single one of those investigations. And they look at it to ensure thoroughness, completeness, objectivity, and they can make recommendations that more needs to be done, and they can make and then they make recommendations in terms of whether or not the case should be sustained, not sustained, exonerated, and they make those to me. And so we have citizens in our community who actually review these cases. And so all of those that I mentioned were reviewed by a citizens committee. And I would challenge any other industry that when it comes to personnel issues, do you have people outside of your industry that are reviewing your personnel issues? I would say the vast majority of don't. Well, the police do. And so that's part of the transparency. We've been operating that way. That panel's been in place for over 20 years, and it's served us well. And I think it helps us gain that kind of trust and confidence that we need, because, and it's good to hear from our community in a lot of these, because there's no great formulas sometimes, or templates or models for us to operate from. And we hear and we listen to our community in many, many different ways in terms of how we operate, what our policies should be, what our procedures should be, what our practices should be. And at one point, I will tell you, there was resistance within the police department. How can anybody not a police officer tell us how to do our jobs? And I say the policing profession, some level, suffers from that still today. But we took on a different way of doing business and saying, you know what? They have every right and perhaps an obligation to tell us how we should do our jobs, because those are the people we serve. And believe it or not, there's a lot of very incredible wisdom, incredible insight, and things that we would have never thought of that citizens actually gave us ideas about. And by the way, when we hire police officers, it's not unusual for us to have students from our local high school sit on our interview boards. And initially there was some resistance to that, but we've seen our high school students here unbelievable in terms of what they've been able to offer around wisdom and insight and perspective around who we should hire. And so transparency has been huge for us. Yep. And so I welcome and invite anybody to come in and to be a part of what we're doing if they want.
All right. So we've been talking almost an hour. Is there anything else you'd like to tell the folks out there?
There is, and it's not something we covered, but it gets into the mode of what we're talking about with community policing, but it takes it to another level. And I mentioned the word social capital. There's 100,000 people in our community, and there is, we believe there's a tremendous amount of social capital, and what that comes down to, with how that's defined, it is the gifts, the talents, the resources, the expertise, the skills of people within this community. We happen to believe it's an untapped resource. And so as we work with these social and health issues in our community, whether it's addiction or mental health or homelessness, and those take up a lot of our resources, we believe that our community can act as a resource as well to help us with that. Now, in the Angel Initiative, we've done a lot of that already. What I didn't mention before is that we've leveraged over $1 million in free treatment for our folks walking through our doors, but we also have people who serve as angels who support our folks, support these folks, employers and other people in the community. Well, we are really trying to surface and activate the social capital. Myself, and I mentioned Dan Benavides, have been walking neighborhoods for about 4 years, And every person we ask or talk to, we invite to be part of the solution. We give them a lot of opportunities, lots of options. Well, we now have police officers and firefighters that are walking neighborhoods as well. And part of their role will be making the invitation to people to become more engaged and more involved. And so this is not typically a traditional role for public safety, but I think we all believe here that public safety has this absolute legitimate platform, not only to engage people in these kinds of conversations about their neighborhoods and about what they can offer in terms of their gifts, but to make an invitation to each and every person in this community to become more engaged. Oftentimes, when Dan and I are walking neighborhoods, we run across folks who say, no one's ever asked me to be involved in anything. They have gifts to offer. Sometimes they just don't know how to offer those gifts. And so we've put a process in place where we're going to be asking people in our community. And so it's another invitation to our community to step up and to be part of making this community the great community that it can be. I said I've lived here for 40 years, and this is a great community. I have a lot of friends, I have a lot of acquaintances, and I'd like to give you a new definition of greatness. Sometimes we look at greatness and we say great athlete, great leader, great performer, great dancer, great entertainer. Well, I think we ought to define greatness by the content of our goodness. And this community is a great community because it has a lot of goodness. And that's what we think is untapped in terms of being able to bring that forward and to make a difference in many people's lives. So,
all right, well, Mike, I would like very much to thank you for your
You're
time.
welcome.
I'm Scott Converse, the publisher of the Longmont Observer, and this is Mike Butler, the chief of Longmont Public Safety.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you very much, Mike.
You're welcome.